Ruben Amorim will become the new Manchester United head coach later in November. First game against Ipswich Town in the Premier League. Very exciting. So today, I'm joined by John Mackenzie and JJ Bull to ask the questions. Who is Ruben Amorim? Is Manchester United's squad suited to a back three style of play? And is he the right pick to be Manchester United's next head coach? We're going to find out. Okay, JJ, who is Ruben Amorim and how do his teams play?
Ruben Amorim is a Portuguese football manager who's going to be the head coach at Man United. He was at Sporting where he's done very, very well. He's young, an upcoming hotshot, 39 years old. As a player, he was quite good, played for his country 14 times, mostly played for Benfica. He was a midfielder, if you're interested in that sort of thing. But his ascension to the peaks of managerial stardom has been absolutely wild. It happened really quickly. So he was hired as the Braga reserves manager in the third division of Portuguese football in September 2019. And 3 months later was then the first team coach of Braga in the first division. 3 weeks later, he won the League Cup in Portugal. And then 2 months after that, he was hired by Sporting. So he had 2 months of top division managerial experience. They obviously thought he was very good because they paid, the third highest fee ever for a manager?
At the time,
to take him in as manager. So he managed 13 games at Braga before becoming the Sporting manager. So you might think, well, that seems that's kind of wild, right? But in his first season at Sporting, he won the league. Sporting hadn't won the league for about 19 years. He changed all of that. And in Portugal, for context, there are three main clubs who tend to win everything, but really it's two, Porto and Benfica. So he disrupted the duopoly, essentially, of Portuguese football, and with a very distinct style of play. Now, not everything's gone his way. In the third season, he talked about regretting how they planned the summer window. They sold a lot of players, a lot of big players that you'll recognise, like João Palhinha, Mateus Nunes, all these sorts of guys.
Pedro Porro,
went to Spurs, yeah. So really, players who have really improved under Amorim and then gone on to bigger things for lots of money for him. But I think it's relevant that he's had that summer window where it didn't go the way he wanted to and he finished fourth that season, and he's learned from that, because you need to be able to learn from mistakes. Not everyone gets everything perfect. It's good having made an error before you go to a job like Man United. The other thing that's interesting about the way they conducted transfer business at Sporting in that time is that Ruben Amorim has made a net profit of 118.8 million euros.
Good lord.
But that's impressive, right? And if you're a club looking for a manager, you want to know that they don't need you to spend hundreds of millions of pounds on players all from your own club to do well. And as you can see, this is what the league looked like in Portugal before he joined Sporting. So he joined late in the 1920 season. And then what you have here, that's the 2019-20 season. He's not immortal.
Sure.
But here you have they improved, then second, and then first last season. And this season, they're currently at the top of the league with an astonishing goal difference. They've conceded like 2 goals or something like that.
Wow. They're
really, really, really good. But how he's done that is what's made everyone really excited about him, because he has a very, well, you can tell what style of play it is. It's always a 3-4-3. It's quite tactically flexible, I would say. They have loads of possession, but also they attack the space and counter when they can. They press high, but they also block low. But his tactics all depend on the players he has available and who he wants to play in certain games. It'll change. It generally looks like this. It's a 3-4-3. You'll see this everywhere, right? So it's a 3-4-3. Wing backs are very important. And what I mean by the players being important to what he does is if he has a really good attacking wing back, they'll go forward a lot, and maybe one's more defensive, they won't go forward quite so much. You have a striker that always plays through the middle, then you have 2 wide forwards who play almost like floating 10s, and what you'll often get is this sort of shape here. It's a bit like a WM or something like that. Maybe the striker drops, maybe they go in behind, that sort of thing. 2 midfielders, one's usually a ball winner, and one of them I've just put as midfielder because they do kind of all of it, help the build up, also rush forward sometimes. Oftentimes you'll get like a front 6, like that sort of thing there. And then a back 3. This is what you always have, the back 3. Now, this one here, the central one, oftentimes will go forward a little bit ahead of these two, so you get this sort of passing shape with these guys in amongst here. Sometimes a wide centre-back will go forward and join midfield. It's all dependent on who's available, because if you have ball-playing defenders on one side, you can do that. If you have only defensive ones, you can't do that. So he adjusts depending on what he has. And I can show you what it looks like with technology and pictures, if you would like me to do that.
I would like you to do that.
Well, I will do that then. So here is a screenshot of Sporting playing Benfica. They're great rivals. And you'll see this is their build-up shape. Doesn't look like a 3-4-3 at all, does it? It doesn't look like that at all. And your back 3 is actually this. Wing backs either side, you can see, and there's midfielders dropping in, wide forwards far up the pitch. The space in this example is here. So you want to work out how to get the ball into that space. They can do it any number of different ways by changing the back 3 shape to this more of a back 4, really, with a player in there. And this might be one way to do it from the goalkeeper, just pinging it long, and they do this sometimes. They will play over the press, and then a wide forward drops into that space. But equally, they'll go short and play the obvious passes here to try and get the ball into space. Maybe an up, back, and through. There's loads of different ways to do it. That's just one example of what they do. But the thing with Amorim is there's not like, it's not always intense high pressing or always low blocking. Like, there's lots of tactical flexibility. They have loads of possession. I think 65% possession average this season.
In the Portuguese league.
In the Portuguese league.
Say,
yeah, well, this is the thing. The talent differential is really important here because there are 3 huge teams in Portugal and the rest aren't quite as big. So you have much better players. Therefore, you're probably going to have more possession anyway, which is kind of interesting. But what I see in them is flexibility. And that gives you strength. You want to be strong opponents and maybe not always exactly the same, so you can work out how to stop them from playing. And if you want to be a strong opponent, you need to be strong. You need strong material within you. And you know what the strongest material on earth is, Joe?
Tell me.
Do you know what it is, though?
Is it concrete?
It's a diamond.
Oh, the diamond.
So you'll remember this here was a triangle. But what have I told you? It was actually a diamond.
Oh.
But here's 2 more.
Oh.
Wow, diamonds everywhere.
I think they're in polygons.
No, they're diamonds.
Okay.
And the thing with diamonds within football is that you can get width and depth really important. So you want to have width, depth. It makes it harder to try and stop you from playing. Basically, you get options to pass. Loads of passing lanes always. Here's another example. Do you see the diamonds, Joe? Here's one.
Oh, there's one.
There's a diamond. Here's another diamond.
Oh, there's another one.
And this reminds me weirdly of Graham Potter's Brighton team because they had diamonds all over the pitch, also played with a back 3 an awful lot of the time.
Right.
Lots of similarities, I think, in the way that they're tactically flexible.
Well, and as Chelsea knew, John, if you like it, you must simply put a ring on it. That's what that's what they say.
That's exactly it. Do you want to see one more diamond? It's a big one. There's a big diamond.
That's a very big one.
There's diamonds all over the pitch, like all different phases of build-up when they approach in the final third as well. There's always diamonds, loads of options to pass, and it means that they can keep the ball, and it's one of the big things they do. Of course, out of possession is really important too. Like I said, they will press high when they want to. They'll also drop deep when they need to. Just 2 examples just to prove I'm not making that up. Here's them playing early against Benfica, and they score a goal from this. They press immediately from kickoff, just right up the pitch, making sure there's no passes on. They force the throw in wide. The ball's over here. The ball goes wide. If I were throw in, they manage to get a goal from that. It's just the pressure forces the mistake from the opponent. They can play that way. But against someone like Arsenal in the Europa League, they'll drop into a flat back 5. Then they'll have a central 4 trying to stop passes through. They'll almost always try and show the ball wide out of possession and then make the pitch small so they can condense space. But you'll try and always have the striker lead the ball one way. So you can see the striker here is blocking the pass backwards so they can show the ball one side of the play to then squish it so they can win the ball back.
Centre-back's doing a really good job there of actually marking the referee as well, right? The centre-back, making sure the referee can't find any space.
Well, you have to make sure the referee can't interfere with play. So I guess that's important. And he leaves no stone unturned. Amorim, I would say.
Well, if you're looking for diamonds, you do have to dig in stone.
And maybe the real diamond is Ruben Amorim.
Well, I suppose we're going to find out. Have you finished?
Yes, I'm going to lead nicely into John now. The key points of Ruben Amorim. He's very good, has done very well very quickly. He always plays a back 3, although there is tactical flexibility within that. He hasn't done hugely well in Europe, which is maybe relevant. But this is the system that he knows. This is the one he always plays. But does that work at Man United? Are there issues with it?
Well, does it indeed? That's what we're going to find out after we hear from Phil Hay with something just a little bit interesting.
True or false? US presidential hopeful Donald Trump was once asked to draw the 5th round of the English League Cup. The answer is true. This was back in 1991. ITV, which televised the draw, went over to New York to stage the 5th round there, and it gambled on going to the Trump Tower on 5th Avenue and asking Donald Trump whether or not he'd be willing to pull the balls out the bag. You'll never guess what, he was, and he did. He didn't seem to have much idea what was going on, but he played along nicely anyway. You'll know about this if you're a reader of the Athletic FC newsletter, and if you're not, why not subscribe and sign up? Comes to your inbox every morning, Monday to Friday. It'll bring you all the big stories and all the weird and wonderful stuff too.
Thanks, Phil Hay. That was interesting. I too love stories from history. Now, John, back 3 at Manchester United with the squad they have. What do you think? Are they suitable?
Well, I think when we're answering this kind of question, it's really important for us to be aware of the fact that I think that a lot of the flexibility that Amorim gets in his system comes from the players that he has in the various positions in the team. And actually what that means is that we can't just do a one-to-one mapping from what his team at Sporting looks like right now and be like, well, this player plays here, who's the most similar Manchester United player to that player, they'll be perfect for it. Whereas I think it is worth starting by saying, actually, he gets a huge amount of his tactical upside from being able to bring players in that have maybe different profiles. And so the concept, I think, of pairing is quite important here. So a good example of that is the wing-backs. JJ's already talked about that, having maybe a more attacking wing-back with a more defensive wing-back. But we could talk about that all over the pitch. I think particularly in the front three as well, there's the possibility of playing very different profiles of players with one another to get different tactical upside. So I'm not just going to go through and say he has this player here now, so this is the player that he has to fit in. And I think the good news for Man United is they have quite a lot of diversity in their squad with respect to player profiles. So there's the possibility that they can, do quite a lot, particularly in the front three. But we'll start at the back and talk a little bit about what's going on there. So Onana, perfect build-up goalkeeper for a guy who wants to play possession football. So I think he'll work out quite nicely here.
Tick number one.
Tick number one. Back three. So the back three is interesting because in a back three, you basically want, particularly in Amorim's system, you want your outside centre-backs to be good ball players, ball progressors, so either by carrying or by passing. So there are a couple of good options there for Manchester United. So Martinez, really good ball progressing centre-back. Maybe slight questions about his ability to defend in wide areas. He's played as a left-back in the past. But Ten Hag didn't often use him as a left-back, I think because he didn't like him defending in those wide areas. But I think he's going to be perfect in possession there. And then Lenny Yoro on the other side. Then the question is, who can back these players up? I think there are some options. I think most of the other Manchester United centre-backs feel instinctively like centre-backs in this system. But we do have players like Victor Lindelof, who's played out on the right. He could fill in behind Yoro. We've actually got Luke Shaw in the wing-back position here. He's also played as an outside centre-back as well. And I think would suit that too. So I think the back three element is fine. And there's certain players I think who really would benefit from it. I think Harry Maguire, this is the perfect sort of system for him as a centre-back. You could start out playing him. You've got De Ligt behind him. He's a bit younger, so you could use the two to almost have succession planning. So I think that again, the back three works here. There's probably work to be done in the transfer market.
I was going to
bring
ask,
in bigger, better profiles. But
maybe not January or the summer, but one of the questions that Man United fans will have is where will they most likely be spending money?
Yeah, and I think whenever you move to a back three system, you are going to have to end up spending money on centre backs because you're playing an extra one, right?
I assume you're going to say the same when it comes to wing backs as well, though.
Wing-backs is a really important area, right? Because the big difference, we can talk about centre-backs all we want, but the difference is that you're now providing width in a very different way with a wing-back system. Because I think most teams, they have the full-backs, they support in this kind of area, and then the width is provided by wingers usually further up the pitch. Whereas here, what we're saying is, well, we want our width to be provided by sort of midway between attacking and defensive players. The profile of player that you need in this kind of position is, I think, quite different, particularly from a physical point of view, right? The expectation is that you are supporting attacks, you're offering width when the ball's high up in the area. These wide forwards are going to be narrow, they're more like 10s. So they have to be able to support in that kind of area. But they're also going to be doing a lot of defending in a flat back five in that lower block.
So it requires a lot of athleticism.
A lot of athleticism, the ability to be creative in forward areas, but also the ability to be defensive in a back five as well.
It's a huge amount of chances created and even goals scored by the wing-backs in Amorim systems all the time. And that's one of the things with the players here. The most attacking of all of these is maybe Malacia. The rest of them are more defensive-minded. But if all your width's coming from your wing-back, that's going to be an issue. You need to be able to go past people, be fast enough to get up and down to beat a man, but also be good at dribbling. Maybe Dallo, who used to be a winger, but then his numbers, like Alex Barker was pointing out the other day, his numbers for going past people is really low.
Sure.
So are you able to use any of these players to do what you need them to do as a wing-back?
I would instinctively say that if Luke Shaw could stay fit, he would be great in that position. But it's of note that in previous back three formations before, he's actually played as the left centre-back, as you mentioned. So
I was going to ask John, do you think Garnacho would be a natural potential attacking wing-back?
I mean, that sounds like a very EA Sports FIFA style thing to do, but what do you think?
There's going to be a few players where people will ask that. I think Mason Mount, people will probably say, could he play as a wing-back?
As a wing-back? I never thought of that. I bet he could as well.
Yeah. And I think the problem is that when you're moving to a back three system, you do want to have specialist wing backs because it's such an important position, because what you get basically is in your build-up, you just get really nice access into these wide areas. And then what we see a lot, particularly in the last couple of iterations of Sporting, is that, yes, you would think that you'd maybe want your wing backs in these kind of areas, but because they're so direct in their current iteration. What you often see is them playing these balls directly in behind for then one of the number 10s to run onto into this area and then play a cutback as well. So there's the possibility that you can maybe get away with not having like flying wing backs necessarily at this point, but I do think that eventually you just want to bring in specialist players in that kind of position. That's why it's a big question of moving to a back three system, right? Because you're spending a lot of money. If you're Manchester United, you want to have the best wing backs available to play this kind of role. And then if in the future you ever want to move away from that, you then end up with these sort of like unicorn players that that don't fit into your new system.
We were talking about this before, and you reminded me of Victor Moses at Chelsea. You also said, though, that when Victor Moses was brought in to play that role, he wasn't considered a wing-back at the time, and actually, he just had a profile that really suited it. So what do you think of players that are either already in the squad here, or maybe that could be brought in, like Ahmad, for example? I think people would also ask, could Ahmad play as a right wing back?
I think the difficulty with like moving attacking players into this position is, as we've said, like it is a mid position between attacking and defensive work, and to expect players like Garnacho and Ahmad to do defensive work, and it's not just defensive work, right? Because wingers in the Premier League are expected to do defensive work, but this is like when they're blocking low, you're in the back line, right? And I think it's very hard to do that. I mean, Arteta can get Bukayo Saka to do that, but I think that it is a struggle to get players to commit to that kind of system.
Okay, right? And just to clarify for some of our younger viewers, when you said mid, you actually meant middle and not rubbish, right? Just to clarify for the members of Generation Z, I think it's very important.
Should we talk about the midfield?
I'd love to talk about the midfield.
Just two-man midfield, as we've talked about. JJ said one of those players is going to be a ball winner probably, and lo and behold, Manuel Ugarte is a player who has played for Ruben Amorim as a ball-winning midfielder. So he
almost like they planned it.
Yeah, it seems to be a lock-on for that kind of position. You've got Casemiro behind as an option as well, so quite nice rotation options there. On the other side, again, talking about pairing, what we've seen from Amorim is that he's played a number of different types of midfielders in that spot.
Which is why I put just midfielders at other positions in that Sporting example, right?
Yeah, so you can play, if you want more control, you can play a more control midfielder. I've got two options here, Mainu and Eriksen. Both of those would be, if you're wanting to hold on to the ball and not be quite so direct, both of those would be great. I think, again, we could make the argument for maybe Mason Mount dropping in if you want to, because what often happens is once the build-up is settled, what you end up with, again, is this 3-2-5 with the two wing-backs really high.
Yeah.
And often, if they're playing against a team where they feel as though they don't need to have as rigid a rest defence, so covering if they lose the ball, you'll see that other midfielder push into the front line as well.
Well, it's funny with Mason Mount, isn't it? Because he's obviously totally rubbish, except for the fact he can play every position on the pitch.
Which is a lot like how they use Pedro Gonçalves, who'd often play, I'm going to use Bruno Fernandes as the example here. So oftentimes Gonçalves would play over here, but in some games you'd have him as the attacking player, which maybe use Fernandes, but then I don't know if that would work in the Premier League because you're going to have no midfield, right? Yeah,
this is something they tried out in the 22-23 season in particular, I think, with I was going to say Fernandes, not Fernandes, it was Gonçalves, in that deeper position. And I think it was an attempt to, again, what we're talking about, find tactical flexibility through moving personnel around. So if you are going to have a player who's going to move into that front line, why not make it a more creative player? The question is going to be how well can you defend the transitions when you lose the ball? And I think that actually it didn't work too well, because I think what ended up happening, as would happen if you moved Fernandes deeper, is it meant that the game became just a bit more frantic. You weren't keeping the ball as well, you weren't controlling the ball as well. So what we've seen since then is players move into that position who can control the ball a little bit more, just to prevent those games just becoming too much like a basketball game. But there's definitely the potential of doing that. But I think that with the players that Man United have, they probably won't need to do that as much.
Speaking of the players Man United have, Fernandes. Where does Fernandes fit in this situation? Because he's their best player. Yeah, so we're talking about the front three now, right? So I've already said like the pairings that you have between players are going to be interesting. So maybe it makes sense then to talk about the strikers first, because the players, the 10s around the strikers are going to be servicing the strikers. So it depends what kind of profile of striker you have. And Man United have two very different profiles of striker, but interestingly enough, I think they profile quite nicely to players that Amorim's had before at Sporting. So maybe you can one-to-one map here.
Maybe you can one-to-one map. But I think the thing is, at the moment, they have Victor Gyökeres, who's just having an incredible couple of seasons at Sporting.
Yeah, his numbers are like ridiculous. Yeah, and you've seen them.
Not just in terms of like the goal involvements, in terms of like build-up and stuff. If their build-up goes a little bit wrong, they know that they can just play the ball long into the channel, and Gyökeres is going to get there probably ahead of the centre-back who's marking him, hold the ball up and bring his teammates into play, right? So a huge amount of upside from playing someone like Gyökeres.
Bit of a stretch player, John.
Bit of a stretch player indeed. And if you're playing with stretch player, obviously you want to have players in the 10 slots who can complement that, right? So players who can find those balls in behind the lines, and players who can move alongside him as well. Højlund profiles really nicely, I think, with Gyökeres. So there's the possibility of playing that way. But then in other times, Amorim has used different kinds of strikers. So he's used a player called Paulinho, who I think probably profiles a bit closer to Xerxes. Again, less of a stretch player, a bit more of a build-up player, is a box presence, but also is going to do the link stuff. And in which case, you're probably going to want a stretch player in one of your 10 positions, right? So then you can maybe bring someone like Rashford into the team as well. So again, what we've got here is like a nice mix of different profiles that I think Amorim will mix and match depending on opponents in order to get tactical upside. So again, the concept here being that what you want to do is make sure that the dynamics between players are going to give you upside, as well as just thinking, well, this is a good player, so we can throw him in and it'll be fine.
Yeah.
And out of possession, I think this is interesting because if I were Amorim, you look at these forwards and know that none of them are really that good at pressing, especially like high up the pitch. So it might naturally fall into a deeper kind of more Jose Mourinho-esque, like deeper line. I don't know whether you can press high, because then you also need your wing backs to push up. And I don't know whether these ones here are able to then provide what you want. Like we say that they show the ball wide and you can like limit the pitch and squish it a little bit. So that might give you some sort of help. But that looks like the issue you'd find, and where you might want to try and bring in other people to help you with out of possession stuff, which is the problem Ten Hag had.
Yeah. Okay. Something to watch out for then. And the final question I have on the squad would be about Fernandes specifically, because I feel in the same vein that we were talking before about whether we could, stick Mount in a wing back position or could Ahmad play somewhere or whatever. I think lots of people's instinct will be to say, well, could Fernandes not play in the midfielder role next to Ugarte or next to the ball winner in that too? Is that a possibility?
It is, but I'd say the way that Fernandes plays by like pinging balls forward constantly, it means that there'll be too many players ahead of the ball and you'd end up losing possession, and like John says, becomes a basketball game. More likely, I think, is the way that we're talking about, he uses Pedro Gonçalves at Sporting, is having him as one of the number 10s forward. He's not going to be in the central space, which is where probably you want him to be best. Now what's interesting is that all the Man United managers of the past who've had Fernandes on their team have ended up playing the 4-2-3-1 that everyone ends up playing, because it gets the players in the squad into their best positions. The fullbacks are in best positions. Fernandes is a number 10, so nothing's really exactly suited to it, including where Fernandes would end up playing. He's played this sort of position for Portugal and not been amazing at it, but you do get, that pass you like, John, this one, that's his best pass, right? So if you can get that from Fernandes, you're going to get some, I'm just going to copy all of John. You get some tactical upside from that, so that's good.
It does sound like the kind of thing.
That's the same thing.
I think he's really suited to this.
Why do I suddenly think you're smarter now? Weird. Maybe you should try shaving your head.
It's because you have such a low opinion of me to start with.
But I think Fernandes is a winner in this system, because I do think this sort of gets him into the areas where he can be creative. And as we said already, if you're going to be building up in the wide areas, you're trying to get the ball to your wing backs. There's the possibility for obviously playing the ball directly in, but then if you can get the ball inside to Fernandes, who can operate in this half space, then he's going to be supremely creative here. And I think it's going to be, it's the same as you stick Kevin De Bruyne in that kind of position. You put the creative guy in the area where he's going to have the most upside, and then you enjoy the fruits of doing that. And I think Fernandes will do that quite nicely.
I think also either I will look good for saying his name the way that he says it, or I'll look pretentious for saying the way that Fernandes says his name.
I don't think you have to worry about looking pretentious.
You don't think so?
No. Oh, well, I guess the only thing left to ask then is, what can the early verdict here be? Is this a good pick, JJ?
I think the charisma is very relevant, and he's meant to be a very good public speaker and good in press conferences, which definitely helps. But I think when you're Man United, what you're looking at is, this may surprise you, you want to have the very best. And if you have the very best manager, well, if you don't have it, you want to get them. Where do you get them from? Normally the very biggest clubs. So they're not going to come, or they're too expensive, you just can't do it. So then you want to look for a manager who is on the rise and has a high potential ceiling. And you want to look around maybe smaller clubs where someone's really overperforming and doing things that you just didn't expect them to do. And so if we look at who the alternatives were, like the equivalents of that are like Xabi Alonso, he's not going to come. Unai Emery's doing really well at Villa, he's not going to come probably. Simone Inzaghi is probably the most elite may be available. He's been at Inter for a little while now. Tuchel went to England. Thomas Frank hasn't really won anything. You can see that Hansi Flick's doing much better than Xavi was at Barcelona already. So there's all these different things, different people. Like Graham Potter was highly thought of for a while, but so was Ten Hag, But Amorim has consistently got Sporting to the top of the league, and he's doing it with the transfer issues. Like, they make more money than they spend, and he makes players better. So you're seeing improvements in individuals. You're seeing them overperform what they probably should do, and therefore you can probably bank on him being decent.
It's also worth noting with Sporting that they're quite a nice correlate to where Manchester United are at, right?
Yeah.
Because Sporting hadn't won the league for ages. They'd had some real crazy stuff going on in the last few years, and he came in and turned things around and made them a respectable club again and had them competing. And so I think that if you're looking for a manager to do that same kind of thing at Manchester United, he's certainly someone to look at, right?
I mean, there's something that's interesting that I've heard from friends in Portugal is that the thing that's outstanding about him in terms of his media personality, his charisma, is that all of the fans, well, not all of them, but many of the fans of Benfica and Porto also like him and wish he was their coach, and that is a very unusual thing in the in that triumvirate there.
That's nice. And this whole thing kind of reminds me a little bit of Ange Postecoglou at Spurs. So same thing in Scotland. Celtic, massive talent differential. Like, they're so much better than everyone else in the league. And so they could play a certain way, and it worked amazingly well for Postecoglou there. Everyone likes him because he comes across really well, which is part of what Celtic fans, especially people in Scotland, just liked him when he was there. He's just a nice guy to listen to, talks normally. But the difference there with Spurs is that their squad isn't better than everyone else's, so you see them hitting like 6th and 5th, really, maybe 4th, because that's kind of where they are. Amorim, when he comes into United, how good is that Man United squad? It's definitely better than what Ten Hag had them doing. And what you'll now see is whether Amorim can apply the same things as he did in Portugal to this team, but it's a totally different league with a totally different thing. Like, Postecoglou came in hugely hyped and did all the right things, but then hit the limit of what Spurs can actually do with the players they've got. And so now we don't know whether Man United are as bad as they actually are, or whether they're seriously underperforming.
Sure. Well, I guess that's going to be the main thing we'll find out. I suppose that the final thing on this, John, would be, JJ's kind of already alluded to it, but when Ten Hag was appointed as the manager of Manchester United, there was an understandable level of excitement based on his success in the Eredivisie, but also based on the perception of who he was as a tactical coach. And it's gone very badly. So, like, how can we be sure that what sounds like a fairly positive conversation about Ruben Amorim as an appointment isn't just kind of falling into maybe the same trap that we did with Ten Hag, or is it impossible to know?
I think that Amorim is very different to Ten Hag in a lot of ways. I think in the past, the way that we view the Manchester United role is, this is a mess. We need to bring in a ceiling-raising coach who's at the tactical cutting edge usually. I guess Ole Gunnar Solskjaer aside, who was more of an interim who sort of stayed on. But you've got a list of managers who like Van Gaal had pedigree, Mourinho pedigree, Rangnick pedigree, a different type of pedigree, but tactically smart. Ten Hag was within that, and I think the idea was you bring in a tactically smart manager, he fixes all the problems, and suddenly you're challenging at the top of the league. This feels like a slightly different appointment to me because I view Amorim as a floor raiser for a number of reasons. So I think the way that we view how good this appointment is should be viewed in the short term and in the long term, because I think in the short term this will go quite well. Because a number of reasons, one of which is that his system, we've talked about it, he always uses a back three, it's usually a 3-4-3. There is scope for flexibility, but largely speaking, in every phase of play, you're roughly in the same kind of shape, right? So let's imagine on the ball here, you push you're attacking, right? You've got the ball high up the pitch, you're pushing your wing backs up, you've got your 3-2-5 shape that everyone has at the moment. Everyone's roughly in the same position, apart from like the wing backs have pushed up. When you drop then into a deeper into your press, maybe you'll drop your full wing backs right back into a 5, and then you've got this 5 in front. But again, everyone's roughly in the same relative positions, right? If you drop right back into your defensive block, your 2 10s drop along either side of the 2 midfielders, and then you have your striker on their own. Again, you're all in the same position. So essentially all that's happening a lot of the time is you're moving in the same sorts of lines backwards and forwards. And it's quite a nice, simple system that can allow you to understand what the coach wants from you. Everyone defends in the same shape, attacks in the same shape. And I think you can get a huge amount of upside just from having a really solid system like that. We saw Oliver Glasner play exactly this system with Palace last season, immediately hit the ground running, and Palace looked quite good at last season, right?
But then it seems to have, he almost got the Bayern Munich job off the back of that, and now that's not working this season. There's loads of different reasons for that.
Right.
And then I guess the next thing looking at is, this is what he does now. Will he change? And does he need to? Because not many elite managers use a back three, who we said earlier, Alonso and Inzaghi, really.
Yeah, the top level of the game. So short term, I think he'd be great. But the big question is like, what is the ceiling? I think there is a question mark about where the ceiling is for this kind of system. Because as we've said, a lot of the tactical tweaks that he does are like personnel based. So as we've said, you bring in better players, and you buy better players for the system in the window. 2 or 3 seasons down the line, what happens if this Manchester United team under Amorim is, maybe just getting into sneaking in top 4, maybe just missing out on Champions League? What do you do then when you're like, well, where do we take this next? There's a couple of options. One of them is that Amorim is young. So there's the possibility that he can evolve. So for example, Xabi Alonso, I think, uses quite a similar system, but I think that there's a lot more flexibility within it and structural flexibility, and you can play that at the highest level, right? The other option is that you feel as though he hasn't been able to take the Manchester United team to the level you want, and then you're sort of faced with the problem, because as you said, there's not a huge amount of elite coaches right now using a back three system. So do you then, you don't want to necessarily move to a back four system with him as a coach, because he's never coached a back four system, right? So it's a risk if in 4 years' time you think the only way that we solve this is by evolving away from what he's done all the way through his career. If you bring in another coach, you're suddenly then expected, as we talked about before, you've got these unicorn full wing-back players. Do you then have to spend a lot of money to move the squad around?
So much Chelsea the problem with couldn't get rid of wing-backs, because then you can't sell them for the money you bought them for, because no one actually uses them. And the thing with back threes, generally, I mean, this may be wrong to think of it this way, but they're usually quite defensive tactics. It's normally you want to just try and have bodies behind the ball, so you've got 5 and 4 behind the ball rather than trying to attack. Pep Guardiola's used a back three, but he uses it in a very different way. He has basically your fullbacks or your wingers are here, so it looks like this. It's totally different to how Amorim uses it. So maybe he'll do that, but then you need completely different players who can keep the ball in the field. Rashford's nowhere near that team to be able to do that. And again, if it doesn't work, then you're ended up with a squad that doesn't really fit whoever else comes in. Yeah,
so I do think it is quite a risk, right? Because you're sort of projecting to the future that playing this kind of system and back three systems might come in. Obviously in 3 years' time when this maybe becomes a problem, and it's it's a nice problem to have because it means you've had 3 years of relative stability. Yeah. But you're making a prediction about the way that football is going to go. You're saying maybe back three coaches will be a lot more popular, there'll be a lot more elite level coaches. But I think that if you do go towards a back three system and then you think it might not work in the future, you're definitely limiting potential back three elite coaches that you can then go for. And the only other option then is to spend a lot of money to make your squad fit the other way around. That's the question that Manchester United leadership team should be asking right now, is okay, this is probably going to work quite nicely in the short term. What does this say about where we go in the future? And I think that's also an interesting question.
Okay, so that's the nuance. Now for the fun. Good pick, yes or no?
I think it's a very good pick.
Okay, good pick, yes or no?
I think it's a good pick because I think Manchester United need to be solid now rather than,
We did the nuance bit already.
Okay.
That's the end.
If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. The Athletic is home to some of the world's best sports journalists, including David Ornstein, Amy Lawrence and James Horncastle. With the latest transfer news and insights on every Premier League story that matters, theathletic.com puts you inside football, and you can try it for free now for 30 days. See the link in the description.